Many of you have listened to me swoon over Keegan Murray here over the last couple of weeks in the Locked On Kings podcast, and you've basically screamed at me the Sacramento Kings are not good enough to pass on best player available or highest ceiling, most star potential for best fit. And you know what? You make a really good point. On today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, I'm going to be joined by Sam Ferris, one of the great hosts of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. He also does excellent work for Draft Dummies. Had him on last year covering the draft, does phenomenal work. We're going to dive deep into the Jaden Ivey versus Keegan Murray conversation. He makes a really, really strong and compelling case for Jaden Ivey. Also, we'll talk about Chet Holmgren and the possibility of the Kings moving up to number 2 to go get him. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm currently a sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News in Sacramento, and we are now officially 2 weeks away from the NBA draft. Still a lot of time. I hope you're not as impatient as I am. Very much looking forward to draft night. Of course, we have the NBA Finals to hold us over a little bit, and I think we're all hoping the series goes 7 games just so that it can get us closer to draft night itself. But draft night kicks off a massive offseason for the Sacramento Kings. Really, the offseason has already well begun with the Kings and their coaching search, bringing in Mike Brown. But we know that Monte McNair, Kings general manager Monte McNair, has to do a lot to the personnel of this roster, has to do a lot to improve this roster. It's one thing to bring in a head coach, and many of us think that he got the hire right, or at least made a good hire in Mike Brown. Doesn't matter if you don't have a good roster for Mike Brown to coach, and the Kings drastically have to improve this roster, or if nothing else, build upon their core of De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and I think you could throw Davion Mitchell in there as well, Harrison Barnes too. So this offseason, massive in so many ways, really kicks off with the NBA draft, and of course, with the Kings moving up to number 4, their opportunities are unlimited. There's so many ways they can go, and the debates of which routes they should take, which routes they should avoid, those have been going crazy on Kings social media, Kings Twitter, on online forums, in my comment section on YouTube, in my emails and personal messages sent to me. I love the conversations, love the debates, and I know a lot of you have been really heavily on the Jaden Ivey train, or team Jaden Ivey, or really want the Kings to take Jaden Ivey at 4, and have disagreed with me a lot with my appreciation or my desire for the Sacramento Kings to take Keegan Murray. And I want you to know that even if I disagree with a lot of your arguments, I hear almost what every single one of you are saying. I understand exactly what you're saying. You make fantastic points that can't necessarily argue as confidently as I normally would like to in any kind of sports debate. I still am very high on Keegan Murray. I still think Keegan Murray could be fantastic for the Sacramento Kings. I still think Keegan Murray has the potential to be both the best fit and the best player available at number 4. But of course, that doesn't mean that I'm right. And you're also listening to someone who pays attention to Sacramento Kings basketball all year and only slightly pays attention to college basketball, really dives into college basketball around the NCAA tournament and during draft season when I'm reviewing prospects. So myself, compared to my guest, Sam Ferris, who dedicates his life to NBA draft coverage, to diving in and taking looks at NBA draft classes, not just around draft time, but all year around. Their opinion, his insight is going to be significantly different from mine in a lot of ways. And he makes a very compelling case for the Kings drafting Jaden Ivey. He also makes a very compelling case for the Kings moving up to number 2, or even higher than that, to go and get Chet Holmgren. But if you're a Keegan Murray fan like myself, I encourage you to listen to everything and really think about this. He got me thinking. Again, I'm still team Keegan Murray at this point in time. I still like Keegan Murray for the Sacramento Kings, but Sam Ferris makes an excellent argument for Jaden Ivey and does share concerns that he has with Keegan Murray that I think are very valid. So I'll get out of the way. Here is my conversation with Sam Ferris from the Draft Dummies and one of the hosts of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. T-minus 2 weeks until the NBA draft. Still a lot of time for more smoke screens to be thrown out, a lot of time for boards to change drastically, and a lot of time for us to learn more about this 2022 NBA draft class and who would be best for the Sacramento Kings to take. And one of my favorite guys to talk to, one of my favorite accounts to follow during draft season, had them on a lot last year around draft time, is Draft Dummies. Not only do they do excellent work by themselves, Sam Ferris from Draft Dummies do excellent work by himself covering the draft, but also you can catch him on our Locked On NBA Big Boards podcast, one of that amazing team that puts out great draft content, not just during this time of the year, but year round. Sam, welcome back on Locked On Kings, my friend. It's exciting to talk to you. I wish, well, let's be honest, I wish the Kings didn't like the draft or care about, or the draft didn't matter as much to the Kings as it does every single year. But to talk about a team that's in the 4th spot in the draft, that's exciting. So I'm glad to have you.
Yeah, it makes the offseason fun. This is kind of what I do year round. So I follow the Kings. I followed the draft. So it's an exciting time of the year for the teams in the finals, but also it's fun looking forward to the draft with 2 weeks to go. One of my favorite times of the year. So always excited to talk about these prospects with you.
So, Sam, the big conversation really since the Kings moved up to number 4 on draft night, it's revolved a lot around Jaden Ivey, who, if you look at most mock drafts, you listen to most conversation outside of that consensus top 3, if it is such a thing, Jaden Ivey seems to be that guy at 4, number 4 in this draft on a lot of people's boards. I personally am very high on Keegan Murray, who you see mostly around the 5, 6, 7 range, which the Kings might have been at had they not moved up in the draft lottery. And then we get into this conversation that we have every single year in Sacramento about drafting for fit versus drafting best player available. Or really, I like to replace best player available with drafting for highest ceiling. The reason why I do that is because best player available to me means whoever the best player is at that point in time and can come into the NBA and make an immediate impact. I think Keegan Murray, as of right now, compared to Jaden Ivey, is the best player available. Not by much, but I personally think that's where he's at this point in time. Doesn't mean that he's going to be a better player than Ivey, but right now he could help the Kings more from day one. Do you think that's an accurate assessment? Am I undercutting Jaden Ivey a little bit, maybe overselling Keegan Murray?
Well, I'm glad we're having this discussion because I think I always like this debate. Everyone's got a different opinion. I bring a different opinion. I'm on, like, I would 100% take Jaden Ivey.
Okay.
I do view the top 3 as the top 3 guys, but I am on record as saying I don't think it's just the top 3. I think it's the top 4, and I think Jaden Ivey is that 4th guy in the top 4. And so then the next step is you think, in terms of extracting the best value in the draft, if you think about it, if you're drafting at the end of a tier, you're in a really good spot, because if you view those top 4 as the top 4, then you get whichever of those guys falls. You're getting great value there. So I personally, as a draft analyst, really like where the Kings are picking, because if I were there, I would just take whichever the top 4 falls. It looks like that's going to be Jaden Ivey. The funny thing is that coming into last college basketball season, I was one of the highest people on Keegan Murray, if not the highest. I talked about him being one of the top returners, talked about him preseason more than most everyone else. But what's happened is he's even risen kind of above where I'm comfortable taking him at for a couple different reasons. I don't know if you want to get into kind of the reasons there or where you want to go next, but I do view Jaden Ivey as the clear favorite and the guy that I would take. And I think I think it's fair to look at safe versus ceiling, fit versus best player available. But to steal a line from Ryan Russillo, he says, if you suck, you should not be drafting for fit. And I'm not saying that the Kings suck, but I am saying that they have been picking in the lottery. If you're picking in the top 5, I just think you do have to swing for the highest ceiling, the best player available, and you'd be just selling yourself a little bit short if you're not doing that.
Yeah, please, Sam, give those reasons for why Murray has risen to like the range, maybe a little higher than you're more comfortable. I'm very curious.
So I'll just give context to why he's risen so high, and that's frankly because the season he put up as a sophomore statistically at Iowa was ridiculous.
Mm.
Whatever metrics you want to look at, whether it's just the raw stats like points and rebounds, were awesome. But any type of advanced number you want to look at, he was awesome. BPM, one of the top scorers in recent college basketball history. I posted on my Twitter account recently. He's the only guy ever that has ever posted 50 dunks and 53s in a season. Like whichever way you want to look at his season statistically, it was unique. It was awesome. The first reason why I'm a little bit lower is just his age, which I know is a little bit boring. People don't want to talk about it. He is going to be 22 when next season starts, when he plays his first game as a rookie. And the Kings fans have gone through that last year with Davion Mitchell. So you guys are used to this discussion. But I think I just want to mention that he is older for his grade or for his year, going to be 22. So you have to compare him with other 22-year-olds, which means guys already in the NBA. And the rest of the guys in the lottery mostly are younger freshmen. You know, if you compare him to like a Paulo Banchero, for example, just think about what Paulo Banchero would do to the ACC or the Big Ten 3 years from now, the development that he could make over that time. So that's my first point. I do personally really value youth, and I think that's kind of bears itself out over the history of the draft. The second reason is I talked about those stats, and those are all valuable. Those are valid. He earned those. I'm not debating he was awesome. I will add a little context that if you think about Iowa, if you follow college basketball, they are always a really good offense and then pretty mediocre defensively. And in recent history, they kind of always have one guy that they really run their offense through, that they really focus, and that just really gets a lot of stats. Luka Garza was the player of the year before Keegan Murray got there. They tend to really help one guy really show himself off. So I think he did benefit from that. And then the other thing I would mention is that I don't know one thing that I can tell you that I'm certain that he's going to be great at. And I'll also add that he relied a lot on kind of overpowering college players with that physicality. And even though he's not like an explosive athlete, that's something he was able to do, is just kind of overpower a lot of college players due to being a little bit older, stronger, physically mature. But he's not really explosive. And I'm not sure that that physical style of play is going to translate. And so just kind of one thing to finish on here. If you look at his synergy breakdown, it's kind of weird because like his best play type was on post-ups, where he ranked like in the 99th percentile. He was like the best post-up player, but he wasn't necessarily posting up a lot in the offense, like in set plays. But what would happen was he wasn't able to get by his guy with like a quick first step, just not able to consistently beat his guy. So you'll see him kind of turn his back and use his strength and physicality to overpower college players and get to the rim. I'm not sure if that kind of attack is going to work at the NBA level with his kind of lack of a first step. So those are kind of like 3 or 4 items that I've got written down on my notes that contribute to him just being a little bit lower for me. I don't think I mentioned where I have him, but I have him kind of in the 10-11 spot on my board.
Wow.
So a little bit lower than where most people do have him.
Well, very interesting. So what makes Jaden Ivey's ceiling so significantly higher than Keegan Murray's in your mind?
Nuclear athlete, I think, would be the main thing. He's such a good athlete. I mean, it's so rare. I've mentioned this before, but if you just go watch his dunks from last year, you could watch like a 10 or 15 minute highlight reel. And I'm not talking just like normal dunks. I'm talking like ridiculous blow by dunks. The line that I like to use with him is he can make a fast break out of nothing where there is no fast break and he's just blowing by everybody to the rim. So he just has physical tools that you can't teach, right? As an evaluator, you got to start with what does this prospect have that cannot be taught, cannot be learned, that is special about him. And Jaden Ivey has that. And so that's where you start with him. But he's improved his jumper. He shot it well in high school, didn't shoot it as well as a freshman, and then shot it better as a sophomore. And so, depending on where you are on his jumper can influence kind of your view of his game. But I just think that as a freshman, he was really good too. And then he went and actually played for the Youth USA team over the summer between the freshman and sophomore year. And you could see that leap coming. He was one of the best players for that team. That was basically, an all-star team of the best young players for the USA and around the world. You could see that leap coming. And then we saw it last year. And then the production all came together where he frankly was just really good just around the board in all aspects. But combining that with the athleticism and the skill that you can't teach, I think that's why I view him as more of a high-end, higher ceiling prospect.
Today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by Sakara. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools that you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Their nutritionally designed, chef-created breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door. It's meal prep that's healthy, made easy for you, ready to eat. Sakara's functional plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body that you love living in, from their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the Foundation, which is their daily supplement packs. Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. Right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20, or you can enter code Sakara, or rather Locked On 20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockedon20 to get 20% off your first order. So you can speak on this better than I can and better than most can. Is there an element you think of the wow factor, the athleticism, the sexiness, the pizzazz, and the flair that he plays with that overshadows at least in my opinion, like the fundamentally sound, solid game that Keegan Murray has? I know you mentioned like you question whether if he's really good at any one particular thing. He's just he's a very solid all around player, which I think could be attractive to the Sacramento Kings, but maybe not as high as 4, like we're discussing here. But are we in love with Murray more than, or rather, love with Ivey more than Murray? Is Ivey so much higher than Murray because of that flair and that flash and that athleticism? Or do you think Ivey also possesses a lot of really essential fundamentals, not only to be a solid NBA player, but to potentially be a star? Because the Kings have drafted for like really good athletes in the past. Ben McLemore drafted an incredible athlete, but he didn't translate because he didn't have the fundamentals. He didn't have the basketball IQ. Is Ivey significantly different than that in your mind?
Yeah, first off, I want to say, and I know all your fans are aware, but there is no sure thing in the draft.
Sure.
It is a crapshoot at a certain point. A lot of people thought Ben McLemore was going to be a great prospect, and you look back on paper and it's like hard to see why he missed, right? So I'm not saying for sure Ivey's going to be better. For sure, like Keegan Murray is going to be worse than him at all. I'm just saying, based on my view of them as prospects, this is where I come in. I think you do make an interesting point, though. Like maybe we look too much at the flash and the pizzazz with a guy like Ivey, but maybe kind of the simple game isn't as attractive to the eye. The highlights aren't as cool. And I get that. I do want to see in the prospect, like one thing I can bank on them being really good at. And I don't quite see that necessarily with Keegan Murray, especially with him being older. Just that age curve is something I value, where the biggest growth you see early on. And the thing with the younger prospect is like after Keegan Murray's rookie year, and he's like going to be 23 next year. And it's like, wait, he's already as old as guys that have been playing in the league 3-4 years. And so you lose some of that development. But I think you do raise an interesting point. I just go back to the athleticism that Ivey has. He's going to step into the league and be a top 1% athlete in the NBA. That's just something you can't teach, you can't learn, you can't give to somebody. And so those special physical tools, I don't want to miss out on. And like I said, he's already improved. He improved a ton as a passer. And as a shooter, the skill game's improved, and he's going to have to continue to improve. But he's better than a lot of the other just kind of athletic prospects that we've seen in terms of the skill and the floor game at this point in time.
With Jaden Ivey, what about his fit with De'Aaron Fox, his fit in Sacramento? Because while I understand what Ryan Russillo says, if you suck, you just take the best talent, you figure it out. And in many ways, that's been Monte McNair, Kings general manager, Monte McNair's track record. He has De'Aaron Fox on his roster. In his first 2 drafts, he takes Tyrese Halliburton, guard, and Davion Mitchell, guard. And he ended up swapping one of them in Tyrese for a former All-Star in Domantas Sabonis, which just goes to show you, even if a player doesn't necessarily fit, you take that value, you never know what it can turn into further down the road. But the Kings are in a position right now where they're trying to win right now. They basically have a 2-year window with Domantas Sabonis' contract to try and win some games. We've heard reports of a playoff mandate for this year, which some fans like, some fans don't. But they essentially have 2 years to start winning to convince Sabonis to re-sign, or they're in a world of hurt. So fit is, you have to at least acknowledge fit, even if you're not making your selection on fit directly. So in your mind, Jaden Ivey's fit alongside De'Aaron Fox, I'm not expecting it to be perfect. I don't expect it to be excellent day one by any means. Even with Keegan Murray, who I think is an excellent fit, I don't expect it to be perfect on day one. But how do you think Keegan Murray, or rather Jaden Ivey, and De'Aaron Fox can fit and play together theoretically for a team that's trying to win right away?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do fall back on just take the best player available. But in terms of the fit, I do look at the Fox thing, and something I've been thinking about is maybe they can both be mutually beneficial by getting each other out in transition by running a little bit more. Maybe that athleticism together can complement itself, get each other going in transition. So maybe that could be a fun avenue. One of them or both is certainly going to have to shoot better and learn to play a little bit better off the ball. But one other thing I'll point to is you didn't specifically ask about Sabonis, but Sabonis is very similar to a guy that Ivey played with in college who was Travion Williams. Now, Sabonis is the better NBA version, borderline all-star version of that. But in terms of the passing, the DHO game up top, that's something that we saw Jaden Ivey do at Purdue. And I think he can play well off of a big like that. Even, in some pick and roll, but also just the DHO game up top or playing off of another big like that. That's something that he did already at Purdue. So that does give me a little bit more comfort. And I think he's kind of the other pillar of the franchise that you have to take that into account a little bit with. And so those are kind of the things that I had thought in terms of the potential fit with the Kings.
Locked On Kings, also brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information all year long. Doesn't matter what sport it is, you can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championships, the NBA Finals going on right now, NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, of course, the latest fighting news, MMA, UFC, boxing. They've got it all. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Plus, their prop bets and their future bets. So much fun. Really, the future bets are what I enjoy so much. There are future NFL bets right now out for next season. There are going to be plenty of future bets surrounding the Sacramento Kings, their win totals, their championship odds, individual bets for players. There's so much great stuff for you to make your money on using your Kings or just general sports knowledge. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Moving away from those two prospects, we've also heard rumors, topics, conversations, potential of the Kings really being infatuated with Chet Holmgren. And it's easy to see why. He checks a lot of boxes as well in terms of fit, spaces the floor, can protect the rim, which the Kings significantly lack rim protection. Really been looking for someone this offseason, whether through the draft, free agency, trades, to pair with Domantas Sabonis in the front court that fits his skill set, but also fits De'Aaron Fox's skill set, aka spaces the floor, gets the hell out of the way, and then defensively can give the Kings a little bit of a pulse. Chet Holmgren theoretically checks those boxes. The Kings more than likely have to move up to 2 with Oklahoma City in order to get that move done. I have no idea what that move looks like, how much they have to give up in order to convince OKC to swap picks with them. But do you think Chet Holmgren would be worth the potential package and the effort the Kings would have to make in order to move up to number 2 to draft him?
So that's a little bit difficult because you'd need to know what the trade is going to be, but pretty much for sure, I would say yes on that because I'm a big Chet Holmgren believer. Number 1 guy on my board.
Ooh, okay.
I've said this for every team in the NBA, I'd take him number 1. For every team in the NBA, I'd take Jabari Smith number 2. And then when you get to 3, I think I'd take Paolo for the majority for like just over 50%. And for the rest, I'd take Ivy at 3. So I do have those guys as my top 4, but Chet to me is the guy that I have number 1. I think he's the best player in the draft, but if we do want to talk fit, which we're on a Kings podcast, I really do. I would like the fit. I hadn't thought about it too much because I hadn't, thought about Chet falling to 4, but if the Kings were to trade up to 2, that would be awesome. As someone that grew up in Spokane, to see the all Gonzaga front court, that would be pretty cool next to Sabonis. But in terms of the rim protection, where I think you can't count on most rookies to really do much defensively.
Right.
He is one of the rare rookies that can come in and can lift a defense right away, I do think. But also, you can kind of, depending who you want to call the center or the power forward, you can kind of mix and match matchups so that Chet isn't always kind of being pounded on the glass or guarding like the bigger center all the time, but he still provides that rim protection. He still provides the spacing offensively and the passing. And he has the upside that he showed in high school off the bounce that he didn't really get a ton of opportunity to show at Gonzaga. But what I love about him is he showed he can play a role for a great team and be super effective and efficient at it in Gonzaga last year. But in high school, you saw like the superstar potential. So I think if we want to talk safe, I think a lot of people read too much into the weight, but in reality, Chet's a really safe prospect because of the skills that he brings. But the upside is the highest in the class, and the fit for the Kings would be ideal. One of the main benefits with Chet is I think he kind of fits anywhere, and that's what's so valuable about him. So I would love to see Chet on the Kings. If they can make the trade up to 2 and they don't have to give too much, then that would be awesome. And we've heard too that some rumblings that the Thunder are interested in Ivy, and so if they'd be fine moving down to 4 for some type of package, that would be fascinating to see.
Sam, what is it about Chet that has him a slightly above Jabari Smith Jr.? Because at most mock drafts, most draft boards, you see Jabari kind of as that number 1. There's no consensus number 1 in this draft. That's what makes it so much fun. But Jabari seems to be the most common name. I'm also a big fan of Jabari Smith Jr. But what is it about Chet that slightly puts him above Jabari for you?
So it's a lot of things. I kind of look at the full view. Like I said, it was really good to see him play a role, be efficient and effective in it for one of the best teams in college basketball. So in his context at Gonzaga, you basically saw how effective he was at everything outside of touching the ball offensively, where really good spacer, he could play off of others really well, just understands, has that feel offensively to contribute. But then defensively, he can clean up all types of messes. One of the best rim protectors we've seen in recent years. And just, a lot of people are going to talk about the weight, and that's fine. But the dude is so tough. His intangibles are awesome. And he's going to be a worker too. I just value his contribution to a winning team because I don't see anyone in this class as a certified number 1 offensive player for a legit playoff team. I view Chet and Jabari especially as like really, really, really good number 2s potentially for a playoff team. And so just that little bit bump above, I view him as a little bit better defensively because of the rim protection compared to Jabari Smith. And I think offensively, like I mentioned, what he showed in high school off the bounce, where, he should not be compared to KD, but he showed a little bit of that in the high school level, off the bounce self creation that he didn't get to show at Gonzaga. And so the ceiling is a little bit better for Chet, in my opinion, but also I really value his all around floor game and defense, where I could see him as just being that elite number 2 for a playoff team.
Yeah, I don't think we can ignore the weight, just like you can't ignore anything in the class. But you look at
Yeah.
how skinny Giannis was, how skinny Kevin Durant was when they come into the league. Like, we forget these are 19, 20-year-old young men who still have so much time to physically develop. Plus, they go into the NBA, right? And they get all the tools, they get the gyms, the facilities, the nutritionists. Like, the weight, to me, weight and age are almost on a similar tier. Maybe age is a little bit more important. Like, it's like, okay, I understand why that could be a red flag, but if that's the biggest gripe you can come up with a player, they're probably in pretty good shape. So, speaking of gripes with a player, this is the last thing I have for you, Sam. Shaedon Sharpe. He's such a mystery in this draft, and I know that intrigues a lot of fans. That might even intrigue a lot of teams. I'm in the position where, look, Sacramento Kings are not in the right position, period, whether it's fit, whether it's best player available, whether it's based off the fact that they've struggled so hard over 16 years to develop talent. Like, they are not the right team to take the flyer on Shaedon Sharpe, in my opinion. But I'm still very intrigued by who Shaedon Sharpe is. I see those high school mixtapes. I see the star potential that he has, even though he hasn't played for a year. How do you rank? Where is Shaedon Sharpe on your board? And what is the risk reward factor in your mind to a player like Sharpe?
Yeah, so this is kind of it's a fun discussion around the draft, because you are looking at it through the lens of the Kings, through the lens of the current GM and ownership that are in place, the team that's in place, their current situation. I just look at it as like best player available,
Right.
like in a vacuum, who would I take? So I have him like 5 or 6. And that's because I do value the upside, the physical tools, the profile that he brings, and how good he was in high school. But right, that's the question. If I were actually the GM for the 5th team, the team that was picking at 5, would I actually make that pick with like my job on the line if he doesn't pan out? Because we didn't see him play at all at Kentucky. And so that's hard. That's like, you know, as like an armchair analyst from here, making my own rankings, I can say that with my job on the line as a GM, it's a different call. But in terms of just like the upside and the athleticism, it's just hard to find. And so that's why I said, like, on my board, after the top 4 guys, to me, his ceiling is so valuable that I have him in that 5-6 range. I just value his ceiling higher compared to the rest of the guys in the class. But because we didn't see him in college, there is a chance that his floor might be a little bit lower, that he just might not work out.
Sam, you're so good at what you do. There's a reason why you're a part of this network. Check out Sam and all the other great hosts on the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. And Sam, the work that you do, of course, right now is the busy time of year. And if you want to please share the kind of stuff that you have on the docket, on the radar coming up before draft night itself. But this is a year-long thing for you. As soon as the draft ends, maybe you take a little break and then you start diving into that 2023 class. So can you share a little bit about what it is that you do at Draft Dummies and what you have coming up and what people can expect from you?
Yeah, for sure. You can follow me at Draft Dummies. For those that do follow me, you know that I post a lot of just kind of fun stats and around the draft and related to prospects, but I also do follow the rookies and the second year guys that we followed year round. So posting stats and clips on them as well. But, especially over the next few weeks, it's kind of full bore ahead on this draft class. One recent thing I did was I interviewed Jason Hart, who was the G League Ignite head coach this year. So got some fun behind the scenes info on those prospects. So that's something you could find on the NBA Big Board podcast. And then I'll link to anything else on my Twitter. But like you said, this is kind of what I do year round. I love doing it. So if you want to get some info on the draft over the next few weeks and even on next year's class, then I would appreciate that follow. I think I've got kind of a lot of fun content that I put out.
Well, Sam, I really look forward to talking to you next year about the Sacramento Kings trying to make a non-draft lottery selection. Let's keep our fingers crossed there that the Kings can actually be in that kind of position, or maybe they trade their pick away and they don't have a pick period. Somehow I'll still find a way to get you on to talk about the
Yep.
draft because it's so fascinating. You're so good at what you do. Thank you so much for taking the time, my man.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thanks as always.
Huge thank you to Sam for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. If you were leaning towards Keegan Murray, Sam might have cemented that decision for you. And again, he makes it very, very simple. The Sacramento Kings aren't a good enough team to pass on someone who has the star potential of Jaden Ivey for more of a safer pick in Keegan Murray, at least in his opinion. Again, I still think that Keegan Murray does have star potential while also being an immediate contributor. But I understand everything that he's saying. And if you take his opinion over mine, I understand that too. But I really appreciate you listening to that, whether you're on Team Murray, Team Ivy, Team Chet, Team Paulo, Team Jabari, whoever you're going for. Sam is an excellent resource. There are a lot of players that we didn't talk about, of course, in that conversation that Sam does do deep dives on and talks about plenty. And check out that interview that he did with the head coach of the G League Ignite team. That's going to be fantastic as well. I'm going to check that out right when I'm done recording this podcast today. Appreciate your support as always. I'm looking forward to having you join me on my next Locked On Kings podcast episode. I have a guest joining me, and we're going to do a deep dive into Shaedon Sharpe and his time, I guess, at Kentucky. The fact that he hasn't played for over a year. Talk about how he can translate to the NBA and whether or not he is a risk the Kings or a risk worth the Sacramento Kings taking. Great conversation coming up. Can't wait to have you join me on that. Appreciate your support as always, and I will talk to you next time. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.